In this video, we will show you how to replace your upper control arm on this Chevy Trailblazer. This is part of your front suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your wheel's off the ground with the suspension hanging. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing the center cover, all 6 of our 19mm lug nuts, and then the wheel. Now that we have that out of the way, let's pay attention to our ABS wire. That leads all the way over to the frame. Now we don't have to disconnect this electrical connector, but we do want to have a little bit of slack from this area. With that said, we'll use a trim tool or small prying device. We need to separate the mounting areas. Just get in between the plastic and just separate it from the control arm there. We'll double check to make sure that mounting point is still in good condition. Make our way down along the frame, same thing. Go ahead and separate that as well. At this point, we have plenty of slack from the ABS wire. We're just going to hang this aside. Be extremely careful with it. We don't want to pinch it or damage it in any way. Now we can start separating the upper ball joint from the control arm. For this, you'll find that you have a pinch bolt that comes through from the front towards the rear. We'll be using two 15mm to remove this. Keep in mind, once you have this out of here, we will be separating the ball joint from the control arm. As this separates, we're going to have to carefully pull it away, but we don't want to put a tug on our axle while doing so. Now we can remove the pinch bolt. It's always a good idea to replace your pinch bolt and hardware. If you're not, you need to at least clean it and give it a thorough inspection. Now we'll use a hammer and chisel and gently separate the control arm right in this area. We only need to move it just enough that the ball joint will slide out. As we continue lifting this up and pulling this away, once again, we're paying close attention to that axle. We don't want to let this pull forward. We can just go ahead and set it aside one direction or the other. Make our way up here, just get this out of there. Now the next thing we need to do is make our way up inside the engine compartment. We're going to be looking at where the battery would be located. We have to remove the battery tray, which is located under the battery. We're going to do a little digging here. To do this, let's remove this bracket. The bracket is held in place with 3 mounting points. You have 2 10mm headed bolts, and then if you were to go down along the front here, there should also be another mounting point. On ours, it's missing. I can't tell you what's supposed to be down there, but we'll use a 10mm for the 2 we do have. Now let's start disconnecting our negative battery terminal. Before we disconnect this, if your stereo has a security code, you want to make sure you take note of that. With that said, we'll use an 8mm and loosen this up. Now that bolt does stay right directly in the cable, so we'll leave it there. Make our way to the positive. Once again, using an 8mm here, we'll just go ahead and remove that directly from the battery. Now that we have both of those done, we can remove this plastic cover here. Should want to lift up. It does have a hose up along the front here that will just slide right off of there. Set that aside. Now we can move along the back side of the battery. This is where you're going to find the battery hold down. This has a 13mm nut, a washer, and a plastic mount. There's our nut. Put all this right together. We can set that aside. Now we can take hold of the battery and carefully lift it up and out of the vehicle. Now that we have the battery out of the way, we have a clear view of the battery tray. This is held in place with 5 bolts. We have a 12mm headed bolt, 13mm headed mounting bolts, 2 along the front and 2 along the outboard side. There's one of our bolts. Now let's move along the front of the battery tray. In this area, you're going to find that you have your horn assemblies. Follow the bracket down to where it connects to the body of the vehicle. You'll find a 10mm headed bolt. Let's remove that so we can separate the horn assembly bracket from the body. Now we can move these horns as needed. Now with those horns out of the way, we can remove our 2 forward bolts. We'll be using a 13mm for these. There's our first one, quick inspection there. Let's get the second one over here. Now it's time for our final 2 bolts up along the top outer portion here. We'll be using a 13mm. Since these are easier to get to, I can use an air tool for this. At this point, we'll continue on to dislodging the wiring harness here. You can use a small pick or screwdriver. Just get this separated. Take hold of the battery tray and lift it up and out of the vehicle. We'll set this aside. Now we can move along to this wiring harness. We'll be using a trim tool. Carefully pop this out of place. Now we have plenty of movement from this area, and we'll continue on down along our forward mounting bolt. To remove the forward bolt, holding the control arm in place, you'll find that you have this area of the body of the vehicle blocking it from coming out forward. We're going to have to carefully pry this outward so we can gain access to that 21mm headed bolt. Use a pry bar for this. There's a small hole in the frame that you can slide that pry bar into and just gently pry on this. We don't want to bend anything, we just want to flex it enough that we can remove that bolt. 21mm on there. Now that we finished up top, let's make our way back inside the wheel well. We're going to remove the rearward bolt. Once again, we're using a 21mm. You can tell there really isn't very much clearance in this area to be able to gain access. Generally for this, you will be able to slide it directly behind here. It's just going to be a close fit. The hardest part's getting your tool in there to remove the bolt. Now I'm going to use a 21mm swivel socket with another swivel and an extension. At this point, I should have enough access to get my 1/2-inch air gun in there and remove this bolt. Carefully remove your bolt. It's a good idea to hold onto that control arm. A quick inspection. You can set this aside. Slide this out of place. There it is, friend. Let's get ready to install that control arm in the vehicle. We'll get this in position. Align both of your mounting bolt holes. While we're down inside of the wheel well, we'll be doing the rearward bolt. To do the upper bolt, as you remember, we'll have to be up inside the engine compartment. Reach under here. We are only starting this in, not tightening it. All right, that one started in pretty well. We'll pause now, make our way into the engine compartment for the forward bolt. In the engine compartment, we'll start flexing that fender away, just enough that we can slide the bolt in. Maneuver this around as needed so we can start this in by hand. Out of here. Now let's make our way into the wheel well for 1 second. Now in the wheel well, after we have both of those bolts started in, we're going to have to bring this into the original ride height position, essentially as if the vehicle was sitting on the ground. Now once we have it in that position, we'll continue on with the pry bar, bring it right through the coil spring here. We want to try to have this in that position, and now we can continue on by tightening our 2 bolts. Careful for that wiring harness. Once you have that snug, torque it to 108 foot-pounds. Now before we continue on by putting in the battery tray up here, I always like to continue with installing the rest of my suspension and wheel first. So let's make our way back into that wheel well. In the bottom, once you have that snugged up, we'll torque that to 108 as well. Now we can get the bar out of here. That should stay up in the proper position. And we can start pressing this thing together. Once you have that pulled through, we'll continue on with our pinch bolt. Start on the mounting nut there. Now let's snug this up and torque it to 30 foot-pounds. Now we can start securing the ABS wire. This will go straight up into the bottom of the control arm. Just go ahead and carefully feel along here. Once you find that slot, you can press it in. Press that in there. Now we'll make our way back here. Same thing. This one's going into the frame of the vehicle. We just have to locate that hole and then press it in. Press that in there. With all that back together, we can continue back inside the engine compartment. We'll reinstall the battery tray. It's going to be fairly simple overall. We just need to align everything, start in all of the mounting bolts before we tighten any of it. Let's get these 2 forward ones. One. Now that they're all started, go ahead and snug them up. While we're in this area, let's continue with our electrical harness. We want to make sure it's inside of each of its mounting clips here. Let's get this wiring secured down here as well. Swing this over here, get that in there. Secure this wiring harness along here as well. That should just press right into the plastic. Now that we've done all that, make your way back up into the engine compartment. We'll install the battery. Before we install our cables, we need to install our battery hold down. Now we can put the hold down on there. We'll start with the plastic piece. We'll put the metal bracket over the top and slide it over the stud. Make sure that's sitting right. Continue on with your 13mm nut. For this, we'll just make sure it's nice and tight. Take hold of that battery, give it a wiggle. Install your protective cover. As we bring this down into position, we need to make sure that we reattach our hose to this. So once we get it down there, we'll slide that right on there. The next thing we need to do is install our horns. Go ahead and slide those down into position, start in your 10mm headed mounting bolt, and then snug that up. Just make sure those are tight. Now let's install the bracket that goes over the battery cover. For this, we have our two 10mm headed bolts. We'll start each of those in before we snug either of them. Keep in mind, there should also be a stud or bolt down in this area. Ours is broken or missing, so we don't have anything to show you here. Now we can start reconnecting the battery terminals. When you do this, you want to make sure you start with the positive and then finish with the negative. We'll start these in by hand. Right there is where it feels like it bottomed out. Just make sure it's snug here. We don't want to strip anything out. We just need to make sure it's nice and tight. Now we can do the same thing to the negative battery terminal. You might see a little arc here. That's pretty common. Bottomed out, teeny bit further. Make sure it's secure. Now we can install our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 19mm lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel back on the ground, and we can torque these to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. If you have a center cover, you can put that on now. Have a look along the backside. You'll find that you have a small diagram of a valve stem. This is the valve stem on your wheel. We'll align this area and tap it into place. Okay, friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, take it for a road test, listen for funny noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.